Thank you. Yes, so now I guess I will quickly share my screen and let's see how we go. So I kind of start talking about, I guess, so what about Global South? But it's also kind of at the core of this whole climate crisis and the climate justice. I think one thing we often miss out in the whole discussion that climate justice itself is a more technical, recent crisis, and if we just fix the CO2 in the global atmosphere, we could solve it. And I guess to kind of question that or kind of recenter our understanding of the whole topic, I like to start kind of centering it in the history of the whole human civilization and how we ended up having this huge amount of CO2 emission in the first place. Or it's not that we have the similar kind of CO2 emission from all over the world. So that's why I kind of frame it always that this understanding that we should, unless we kind of start the discussion from this understanding of the historical perspective and how the climate crisis is actually a culmination of colonial exploitation, we would always be a bit off to connect the discussion with Global South. Let me know when you would want to translate or when I should stop. And I could also end up getting quite fast and speaking a bit fast, so you could just, I could see you, the Tonstudio, so if you do that, I would know that
okay, then I
should stop and give a bit of time.
Then I do it immediately. Sie kontextualisiert das historisch, weil die Klimakrise auch nur im Kontext der sozusagen der Jahrhunderte der Ausbeutung adäquat zu verstehen ist. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's start. So what is climate justice? We start in the whole climate discussion. We hear a lot about we need to work with climate justice, or also with the whole Fridays for Future. Maybe you hear one of the most popular slogan. There's like, oh, what do we want? Climate justice. When do we want now? But what does it really mean? So is it just like this a slogan? Is it like some very abstract, confusing idea? Or is it like some people who are in another part of the world who need saving, and some of us needs to be the Superman and save these people in distress? Actually, none of it. So kind of the climate justice includes the core concept of climate justice, talks about how in this whole climate scenario, the whole climate crisis scenario, the people who are least responsible for this climate crisis are the ones who are suffering the most. And it is true for even in one country, inside a single country, and also between countries, like globally. Is everything good? Should I keep on going? Yeah, okay. So that is kind of the core idea of climate justice, that there is a huge disparity or discrepancy between the people who are responsible or the sources of climate crisis and where the impacts are being felt. What do we mean? So just to make it even more...
Okay. Die es verursachen, sind nicht die darunter leiden.
Okay. What do we mean with that? It's again just going back to the basic very quickly. It's the reasons for climate change, if we know, is the CO2. But where does all of this CO2 come from? I mean, CO2 is one of the most, like the 5 greenhouse gases, but CO2 has been the biggest villain in this whole scenario. And where do all of this CO2 come from? If we see, it's this industrial production. We would see like the way we produce things. Then there is the way our energy is produced itself. We have the extraction of energy sources like oil, coal, gas itself involves emission of CO2. Then we have our transportation system, and then we could see a huge amount of CO2 is coming from the way we use our transportation and the way we have been organizing it. And then a big chunk also comes from agricultural production, and that also includes, of course, animals and also just agriculture, like the crops, not only animals and poultry.
Die Gründe für die Klimakrise, CO2-Emissionen und CRT aufgezählt.
So, and then if you look at how does this CO2 lies, like where is the emission from? This is a historical emission map, and the parts of the world that has emitted more CO2 has been bloated a bit to show to make it visually easier to understand where the kind of the primary responsibilities are lying. And we see it's mostly Europe and North America has the biggest share of this total emission historically. And then if you try to look at who are the people who are at risk from CO2, then we see it's a completely different part of the world that's bloated. So now if you look at back-to-back these two maps, this is kind of a very easy, quick way visually to understand this concept of climate justice, how the responsibility lies and where the impacts are going to be. So this is just a way to make it visual or make it more concrete for us. This just shows another map to where the per capita meat consumption is highest. The darkest ones are the highest, and the lighter ones are the list per capita meat consumption in a year. And this another data that shows how, because of climate change, how by 2050 the agricultural production will change. Like red means it will go down, it would turn negative, and the greener one, there is a probability of getting it higher or getting positive. So this is also an old data from 2010 from World Bank, and probably a lot of the projection might have changed a little bit more. But here we also see there are certain regions in the world that are going to be negatively more harshly impacted than other parts.
Das ist ganz kurz, das ist Yield heißt Ernte. Also die Ernteerträge, wo die abnehmen, ist es rot bis 2050 und wo sie zunehmen werden. Ziemlich dramatisch. Go ahead.
So then if you look into the whole idea of climate justice, that it means that it kind of brings together the concept of environmental and social justice, at the same time human rights approach. To address the effects of climate change. So what does it mean? Just again to quickly then recap that, as I was saying, like climate justice or climate change itself is not just a scientific problem. It fundamentally includes social justice and other elements of our societies. And that means really, so the human rights, just to quickly, like human rights approach means like in the if we take a reference that the 1958, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that said, regardless of where we are born, to whatever class, race, color, society, nationality, we, all of us, just as human, we have some fundamental unalienable rights, that we have a certain rights to have a dignified life and have protection, have safety. So if we take that into consideration, then that means the whole climate crisis, the way it's playing out, it's going to violate human rights, fundamental human rights, a huge number of population. So then when we combine these ideas, that's kind of the core of the whole climate justice discussion, or the climate justice idea. So this I would skip a bit.
Give me a second. Was sie sagt, ist, dass diese Situation, die sie mit den Bildern vorher sehr drastisch beschrieben hat, dass das eben im radikalen Widerspruch zu den universellen Menschenrechten steht, weil wenn die Situation so fortschreitet, dann ist klar, dass die nicht mehr, also dass die höchstgradig vernichtet werden eigentlich, diese Menschenrechte.
I would quickly skip these slides a bit. These were just to show how the history of environmental movement or environmental justice comes from the frontline struggles of the indigenous communities in India from 1973 or even back in the days, and how it was the frontline people who were standing up to protect the nature, and they have a very different relationship with nature than how the more heavily industrialized communities and economies had. And this kind of talks about how, like, the concept of environmental justice is to show how we all, as all human beings, we have the same rights to benefit or be protected from environmental burdens. That means like every one of us have the same right to be protected from a hurricane, from a environmental disaster, from a toxic accident, but at the same time we all have the same right to be able to have access to green spaces, to be able to connect with nature. And then why it became a theme, because from the end of 1800s, it happened more and more that big companies had more access to take over big chunks of forests and kind of use it just for their business and extract profit. And instead of take away the rights of the people or indigenous people, or the people who were living maybe nearby, and they had a more intricate relationship with that forest, or how their livelihoods were connected with that forest. It necessarily didn't involve profit making or making product out of it, but involved like a different way of coexistence and a more, like symbiotic relationship. And so this is kind of another stage where the whole industrial way of organizing started encroaching on that relationship, human-nature relationship.
Okay, give me a second. Und in Environmental Justice, da geht es um eine faire Verteilung von beiden Seiten, also vom Nutzen, aber auch von den Lasten. Und sie hat dann jetzt kurz beschrieben, wie jetzt eigentlich im Zuge der Industrialisierung das schon in eine totale Asymmetrie gekommen ist. Also wie zum Beispiel Unternehmen dann eben die Profits aus bestimmten Produktionsprozessen einfach rausgezogen haben, aber die Lasten auf Mensch und Umwelt abgewälzt haben.
Yeah. So then these were just stories, historical
genau,
moments.
Da geht sie jetzt nicht so drauf ein, aber sie hat genau eigentlich auf den Vortrag von Kostas auch, ohne gehört zu haben, Bezug genommen. Auch dort ist quasi die Bewegung entstanden aus eher indigenen Kulturen heraus, die halt einen ganz anderen Zugang auch zur Natur haben.
Yeah, and these are pictures from some of those key moments in the history where people started standing up to protect their communities from this problematic way where our societal power was being used to put down environmentally harmful materials to more weaker communities or have like an upper hand in extracting environmental resources from the community. So the first one is a story of this Chipko movement in India where women, the indigenous community came together to stop the trees from being cut because there was a big company who wanted to make sports goods, cut out this very old forest and wanted to make different kind of sports material out of it. And because the community, their livelihoods was dependent on their relationship with the forest, so they were the first earlier environmental defenders. This is one. And the Warren County movement is also very historic, where there was this story of a big toxic soil that a company wanted to dump, and where they chose a black community to put the soil in there. And later also, and then the people came together, started protesting that they didn't want this soil near their community because it's harmful, it's very toxic. And over the time, it was proven as well that this space, this area was basically chosen, especially because this was a black community. That meant they were weaker, they were socially marginalized. And so this power dynamics, this becomes again clearer how even when we talk about environmental issues or this climate issue, it's again this social power dynamics that plays out to determine or how we make this kind of costs and put it to the socially more marginalized or a weaker group that we think weaker in terms of how much power in this established social structure they have.
Yeah, I think, give me a second, Tonny. Die beiden Beispiele, ich denke, das ist wichtig, weil die so sprechend sind. Das eine ist eine indische Community, die haben in enger Verbindung mit der Natur gelebt und da ging es darum, die haben einen Baum beschützt, das hat man ja gesehen auf dem Bild, wo es darum geht, dass ein Großunternehmen irgendwie diese Bäume fällen und irgendwas aus denen produzieren und dann exportieren wollte und damit eigentlich die Lebensgrundlage zerstört hätte. Und das zweite Beispiel, das Warren County Movement, da ging es darum, dass auch wieder irgendein Industrieunternehmen wollte quasi, ich weiß jetzt nicht, ob es Klärschlamm war, aber irgendwie, also Toxic Waste, also giftige Substanzen, wollten die wo abladen und haben sich dafür eine schwarze Community ausgesucht. Und die haben halt dagegen protestiert und später, als das aufgerollt wurde deutlich, das war nicht irgendwie zufällig, sondern die haben halt genau ganz spezifisch gesagt, na, die werden sich am wenigsten dagegen wehren können, weil die quasi im politischen Diskurs da am wenigsten Gewicht haben und sich eben nicht zur Wehr setzen können. Deswegen tun wir es dorthin. Thanks.
Thank you. So, and this is just a timeline of how climate justice movement developed, but okay, I will quickly skip that. So now we are kind of getting closer to the point where I was then wanted to talk. Then now that we say, or what I'm trying to say, that there is a historical debt or this whole CO2 and the way we are here with this whole climate crisis and why it's a climate justice, like a social justice issue, and it includes, we also have to connect it with the whole colonialism, is because how this whole history has played out. And this is the part where I want to start talking about it, kind of. So what we see is that the current global system, the economic system, there is a specific, like a center of the world and peripheries of the world. And is a certain relationship, an economic, also socio-cultural relationship that these different parts are embedded in. And if you want to look back, how did that happen? Is it something very fundamental? Is it like a nature, or is it like the God created it this way? So when we want to kind of unpack it, we see there has been a specific process that happened over the years, and that process ensured of the way the world order is now and the kind of economic relationship that we are embedded in. And that kind of starts with, of course, the historical colonial exploitation. And that what this image tries to show easily, that how this one whole continent of Africa, and it's also include not only just Africa, the continent of Latin America and Indian subcontinent was extracted. And I would go also a bit deeper, like why do we say, or how does that happen? So the amount of this whole very progressive, industrialized societies or countries that we see in certain world, it happened at the cost of being able to do a primary accumulation that Marx used in his theory, or kind of talked about and said, oh, this was necessary. But then I guess this is also the time to question to what degree or to what ends this process do we take it as a natural process. I guess if you want to go a bit deeper into it, that means so the development in the north that we see, that has happened through several processes. So one, of course, included the ability to go and extract minerals at a very low cost from different parts, of course, the Latin American and also Africa. And then there was this huge free human labor that was extracted for generations, and millions of people who needed to work for free, without any kind of human rights, without any kind of wage, that today we think it's impossible, but that without this huge amount of human labor extraction, the foundation of these very developed industrial countries that we see in today's world wouldn't have been possible. So yeah, of course, and that was possible that was made through slave trade, and that also had financial implications in some ways. That we know that even back in the days in the share markets of Europe, even the shares of slave trade was being exchanged. So it's not necessarily in this whole process just the people who were involved with capturing with the whole sheep and transportation. It was also just normal people who were buying shares and putting money into that business, who contributed in this form of exploitation. And then, of course, the production of that extracted labor ended up in the hands of these societies, in these companies, right, that are also still exist today in the world in different shape and form. And then another element that goes a bit then going beyond, then the colonialism has ended to certain degrees, but then how and then there's another process that we talk about for the Indian subcontinent example of that, how then the capital went in and kind of destroyed the local market, or there were already to certain degree local small scale capital, or even a process of capital accumulation happening in the Indian subcontinent, but how then the whole the British went in and kind of destroyed. And there was a fundamental process of, for example, we know one example of the textile industry, how it was very brutally forced, because in competition, even still in the Indian subcontinent, the textile was higher quality. But then to win over that market, the textile that was being produced in the factories of England, in the UK, they started cutting thumbs of the local textile makers. And then so that there wouldn't be the ability to produce these textiles anymore. And then the people would be forced to then still buy the textiles that were being produced in the UK. So it's kind of then shows again, it's not only just accumulating, but it's also forcing them as a market and forcing the population to buy those goods that were being produced, even if there was some competition. So it's not always this narrative that also gets told in the mainstream economics that, oh, it's a competition, it's a good quality that wins. It's not true at all. There were, at earlier stages, there were unfair, brutal tactics that was used. And it was not about quality. It was also very much about power in kind of enforcing and taking over market in certain forms that allowed for also some of the business relationship to be continued and be shaped.
Give me a second. Ein ziemliches Tempo. Ja. Ist gut, noch weiter mit der Übersetzung? Ja. Also, die Bilder vorher haben ja für sich gesprochen, ne? quasi Afrika wird ausgehöhlt und eben nicht nur Afrika, hat sie gesagt, eben auch Indien und andere Teile des globalen Südens, Lateinamerika, und dann durch den Norden gebracht. Und dieser Prozess, sie benennt eben jetzt hat sie noch eine vierte, Moment. No? Could you go back? Thanks.
Yes, this one?
No, the other one. Yeah, those three, thanks. No, this.
Okay.
Dass diese Entwicklung und diese Entwicklung im Norden eigentlich abhängig ist von diesen drei Dingen, wo wir immer glauben, beim Mittleren ist es am deutlichsten, Sklavenhandel, naja, das war einmal, ne? Das waren nicht irgendwelche Gesellschaften und da finde ich interessant. Also das eine ist klar, also Rohstoffe, die wir rausholen und die einfach hier sozusagen verwertet und Mehrwert abgeschöpft wird. Das zweite ist der Sklavenhandel, wo sie ein interessantes Detail gehighlightet hatte, dass das eben nicht nur die Gesellschaften waren und einige wenige, sondern dass dort bereits die Aktien dieser Handelsgesellschaften in Europa auch gehandelt wurden und gar nicht so wenige Leute, also natürlich weniger als im Aktienhandel heute, aber doch irgendwie auch die Bevölkerung da irgendwie teilhaben konnte, sozusagen vermittelt an dem, was da passiert ist und natürlich auch an der Mehrwertabschöpfung. Und das Dritte, dass auch ganz gezielt also auch nach dem Ende des Kolonialismus eine Dominanz der lokalen Märkte gab, wo, sagt sie, das nicht so war, wie man das oft in Textbüchern der Ökonomie, dass halt dann irgendwie, es gab Wettbewerb und dann ist halt irgendwie eine lokale Industrie nicht wettbewerbsfähig gewesen, weil sie zum Beispiel die Qualität nicht mehr produzieren konnte, sondern sie beschrieben, dass es ganz machtbasierte Instrumente und Interventionen gab, einfach um lokale Produktion zu zerstören und um eine Abhängigkeit letztlich im internationalen Kontext zu konstituieren.
And then what happened, like the similar, like the process that continued a bit even with the emergence of like a more centralized, like one globalization, one central market, or like one global market. How it continued through was then there was this early accumulators of money, like they continues through different corporate structures still today, right? We can even find. There are research that shows that how Unilever has direct connection with early slave traders. Like a lot of those money changed and shifted and then to still exist, contributed in a lot of the corporate structure or the money that these companies had to then venture and change their businesses into different forms, but often they're this global multinational companies. And then there is also with this whole globalization and world trade understanding, we still see how a lot of those extraction continues today with this shifted terms of trade. What I refer with this is there was a study, so it's, I will try to make it very simple, and I guess maybe many of you who have had exposure to economics or have worked with it would know it already. It's kind of this Friedrich singer Titel, earlier Latin American economist, who showed that when two countries engage into trade, and the ones that are producing, for example, simpler primary commodity like bananas or chocolate or coca, and when they engage in trade with a country that is producing more advanced goods, like more manufacturing goods, some tools or some machinery, or for example, just for our understanding, let's take computers. So when a banana producing country and a computer producing country trade, what happens is because of how much this technology that is centered and kind of the way this relationship has been built with each trade, the banana producing country and the characteristics of the goods of these goods like banana and computer, what would happen then with each trade, the banana producing country would need to give more and more bananas in exchange of the same amount of computer. So what that means is that because of how the early economic production were already impacted, based on that, even when these countries goes into trade, they end up in a over time higher extraction of their value of their labor, and they kind of in longer term they keep losing out more and more. So once a country have been pushed behind in their economic development, it's very difficult for them to catch up. And even when they start going into trade, under a trade relationship, this shifts, this keeping this, how you call it, reinforcing exploitation more and more. So that's what I try to mention with the shift in terms of trade. And then free capital movement is just talking about how we have this freedom of the money to move and find wherever there is more higher return. And that could be also, again, we often know that the countries that are at the earlier stages of their economic development would have higher growth rate and higher return. So it's free for the money to go in. And at the same time, there's often no commitment to stay longer, and how this very surge of money suddenly coming in. And then whenever there is a bit of turmoil in the country or some kind of uncertainty, when this huge amount of money again leaves the country, that leaves those smaller countries even more vulnerable, and that harms their steady economic development even more. But at the same time, the money, the capital that already exists, they keep taking away the profit from those countries. So what happens is even the growth or the profit that these smaller countries are generating does not stay inside their country anymore. Because of the free capital movement, they're kind of exposed, and they keep losing out what they're producing in their economy, and kind of losing out, ending it up again in the bigger centralized economies. And then the CO2-based economy basically is trying to talk about showing how all of this, if you go back and see the early stages of whole industrialization, the whole industrial revolution started with the steam engine, and it was driven by the coal. And so this whole fundamental story is connected with burning CO2, and the countries who were the early emitters, who had the possibility at that time, no one needed to worry about climate change. So there was this whole empty, clean, kind of, you can imagine like a clean field. And the ones who could go in early and start like kind of having emission and having the right to pollute early could also do a lot, and really kind of had the higher advantage going in, and then also are the ones who ended up setting up all of these extractive processes through those advantages, but at the same time are the ones who are most responsible for how this whole climate change in the global economic structure is playing out today.
Give me a second, and then maybe think about, take the minute I need to think about how long you will still need. I know that I'm slowing you down, but we have about 5 to 7 more minutes, if that's doable for you. Also, das eine ist, also zitiert Unilever eigentlich gefüllt mit dem Geld, das im Sklavenhandel gemacht wurde, also die Corporate Dominanz über nationale Märkte. Ganz spannend war auch so das Shifted Terms of Trade, da hat sie, ohne den Namen zu nennen, einen lateinamerikanischen Ökonomen zitiert, der so anhand mehrerer Beispiele zeigen konnte, dass die Handelsdynamik zwischen einem bananenproduzierenden Land und einem computerproduzierenden Land so läuft, dass die immer mehr Bananen liefern müssen für immer weniger Computer. Also quasi über Zeit gibt es sozusagen einen Preisverfall der Bananen, und das bedeutet natürlich, dass immer mehr Mehrwert auch extrahiert wird. Das dritte Beispiel, also der dritte Bullet Point, freie Kapitalbewegung, ist einfach die Freiheit des Geldes, dorthin zu gehen, wo der höhere Return, also der höhere, also mehr Zinsen quasi, der höhere Gewinn drinnen ist, und dann geht man einfach halt in die Länder, das ist ja häufig so, die so Schwellenländer oder Entwicklungsländer sind, wo quasi das Potenzial größer ist, strömt das Geld dann irgendwie rein, schöpft dort die Rendite und den Profit irgendwie ab, extrahiert den, und sobald es dann dort irgendwie unruhig wird, wusch, ist das Geld wieder weg, was die Länder einer großen Fluktuation aussetzt, zusätzlich zu dem, dass ein Großteil des Profits abgezogen wird und damit eine kontinuierliche Entwicklung eigentlich verunmöglicht. Und das letzte Beispiel, CO2-Based Economy, das eigentlich beginnend mit der Dampfmaschine halt schon die früher dran waren, damit zu verschmutzen, die haben halt einfach die Gelegenheit genutzt und damit auch mehr Reichtum produziert, ohne aber die Kosten irgendwie entsprechend auch für die Sorge zu tragen, weil die Kosten sind externalisiert auf die ganze Welt, und jetzt ist halt in der Diskussion so, dass man schaut, irgendwie Begrenzungen auf Dinge zu legen, und das trifft jetzt diejenigen Länder, die eben da nicht so früh dran waren, stärker als die schon früher begonnen haben zu verschmutzen. Tonny.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I would then skip this, just some slides to show or give more content to what I'm saying, so you're not like, oh, Tony, how are you saying all that? What kind of proof do you have? So these are just some little proof, like this is one report from Global Financial Integrity 2005-15, and that shows how, so this is just an example, and also it's like often would be, oh, but there's so much aid that's going to the global south, and there's so much money that we're still trying to do, and why are you still talking about this colonialism and this kind of relationship? But then this is one data that shows, and often the problem is with financial information, it's very difficult to track, and there's not still a lot of work. So, but then there's this beautiful report, by the Global Financial Integrity, looks at financial flows and tax haven, that shows that for each $1 of aid that goes to Africa, there's $24 that's flowing out. And even more funnily, there's a coincidence, the countries that are the biggest givers, so the ones that are giving the most, for example, if a country, in this case it's actually the UK, who's giving, for example, maybe let's just say $20, they're exactly the one who's ending up receiving 20 times of $24 of it. So, and you would say, oh, is this just a coincidence? Probably not. So we see how often the aid is also a way of continuing certain form of power and dominance, because it's not so much just the money is going for like aid or charity, it's often to ensure a certain power relationship with those countries, and how a lot of the policy power that exists. And we know today there exists a lot of criticism how the aid work, for example, even German GIZ, who goes suggesting some things in West Africa, but in the end it just shows they were trying to even benefit and make sure some of the German companies are getting some work and are permanently working in those countries. So this is one example, and quickly just, so then, and this net outflow of this $24 is consists of interest payment on debts as well, like the loan that these countries get, and then this debt on it, there's multinational company profits, and there's illicit financial outflow. And just to show that a bit more, so there's this.
Give me a second on this picture, can you go back?
Yeah.
Sie in einem Satz zusammengefasst, wo hast du Beweise für das, was du da behauptest? Zitiert eine Studie, $1 geht rein, für jeden Dollar, der an Entwicklungshilfe reingeht, gehen 24 raus. Ja? Und es ist kein Zufall, hat sie gesagt, zum Beispiel, dass diejenigen Länder, die mehr investieren, auch mehr rauskriegen. Ja, also es ist eigentlich ein Investitionsspiel und eine Fortsetzung des Kolonialismus heute in einer anderen Form.
And then this is also shows even that these are the multinational company profits, and illicit financial outflows are actually also the largest amount of money that's flowing out. So that's not even debt payments and such. So these are just some data to give you a bit of better understanding or ground to what I'm saying. And I think, I would try to just, I'm also trying to pace up a bit. So then we now go with the whole climate discourse. What are the risks? So this is like how I'm saying, like, we need to then think about climate crisis fundamentally connected to this colonialism. But then there's this risk that even with this climate crisis, when we say we need to ensure climate justice, but instead of doing that, we keep reinforcing green colonialism and what that would mean. This is, I would again like quickly just shift through these parts, that this is just one example that shows how WWF, this is an example like by talking about forest reservation in the name of green, this example like how WWF guards were just beating up and stopping the people who lives there, the indigenous community who lives near those forests, and stopping them having access to this forest. And this is just not one, again, like this is not just one separate incident. There are this pattern that's problematic. And also in this whole conservation discussion, we have this very West-centric, very far away understanding of conservation. We take away people from the forest and we think, we would let forests just be there and we will stay here nicely and then everything, our problems will be solved. It won't be. And this is another example.
You can go short on this because I think the next speaker is going to dive into that topic some more.
Okay. Yeah, so this is just, again, just running examples. I would quickly skip. So these were just to show how there's the risk of this whole, so green colonialism. This is, again, how the Sami people, the relationship that's changing in the name of even with the wind turbines. And then at the same time, when we talk about renewables, how there is this lithium battery and problem of mineral accumulation again.
But give me a second to translate that. Wir werden darüber noch mehr hören in unserem nächsten Vortrag. Was sie beschrieben hat, ist, dass eigentlich unter vielen grünen Projekten oder auch Parks etc., die eigentlich ganz dramatisch eingreifen in das Leben der lokalen Bevölkerung und das auch eine Fortsetzung des Kolonialismus ist. Go ahead.
And then it's actually, so then it's kind of at the end of my discussion. So then how do we even go forward? So the first is then we need to first establish this understanding that the whole climate crisis is not just a technical problem, it's a social justice issue, and it has a deep historical root in it. And when we want to talk about solving the problem and kind of learning a way to find how do we live or sustain on this planet, we have to go beyond kind of the current way of understanding and thinking, because we cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that created it in the first place. And it's kind of how I like to imagine, or how I mentioned it, it is kind of the layers of injustices piling up and kind of falling over our heads now through this whole earth system collapsing. And we really need to rethink how then we prioritize our relationship with nature, how we think and connect, how we organize our economy, and how we even prioritize each other in this world. So kind of, if you want to say, so this is where, again, like, because we don't have so much time, but so in terms of going forward, what we need to center is we need to think kind of questioning the whole system. So we need to talk about system change. We need to think about broader shifts. It's not individuals, one of us switching from a coal car or fuel car, oil car to electric cars, or just doing recycling or going vegan. We won't be able to do that just by individuals separately. We need a broader community rethinking and shifting system, and that would happen with everybody, whichever position they are in. We need everyone to show up in their best radical selves. So the people who are in the parliament, the business, all the social workers. So we need everybody to change and rethink and kind of realign. So that we would need a broader discussion, and this is where I think like I'm happy to be in spaces where these discussions are still not there. Then we need to think about degrowth. And yeah, we don't have time to unpack, but I think degrowth kind of talks about how we live, make sure good life for all within the planetary boundary, and question this crazy cycle of consumption we have, because the amount of things we produce we don't even need, and we would see there's a huge amount of wastage that's happening at this moment in our whole current production system, and we don't have a scarcity of things like consumption materials, not food, not clothes, but we have a huge waste and we have lack of redistribution. So that needs to be at the center when we think about we need to find a way to live in peace with the planet. Then all of this has to have a core of decolonization at it, because it's kind of the center or the root of a lot of the injustices. And until we reconciliate with it and be able to brave enough to tackle it, it won't be possible to then center everything around justice. And all of this, we would have to move forward in solidarity. So, yeah.
So we know now what you meant when you said you can go quite fast.
Sorry.
Can I translate?
Yeah.
Can you go back?
Yeah. Yeah, let me go back.
Just one slide, yeah. Ja, this one, yeah. Also es braucht einen übergreifenden Systemwechsel. Die Elektroautos werden uns nicht retten. Ja. Degrowth, ohne das geht es nicht. Das ist ja ein eigener Begriff, über den könnte man jetzt viel sagen. Ich fand, sie hat das sehr schön zusammengefasst. Gutes Leben für alle innerhalb der planetarischen Grenzen, mit Verzicht auf diesen Konsumwahn, mit einer sozusagen Antwort oder einer Lösung für das Verteilungsproblem und für den riesen Müllberg, den wir da schaffen. Genau, und es geht eben auch nur mit Dekolonisierung und es geht letztlich nur mit globaler Solidarität. Und ich glaube, das ist das letzte Bild, das sie auch zeigt.
Ja, thank you.